Chapter 1.
"We're nearing Sardinia now," Constance called out to me from across the ship's deck. "But we can't get much closer, or they may spot us."
I nodded at her, acknowledging her words as I looked across the sea to where I knew the Pirate King's home was. We couldn't see the island from where we were just now, but I knew what direction the island lay, so I watched it as I contemplated if what I was planning to do was wise or foolish. Constance captained our ship. The crew comprised some of the sailors and pirates she had led in the defense of Venice months ago. Our old Captain Theo was busy trying to build a fleet for us back in Venice to keep the city safe from any further invasion, while also running trade between Miletus, Nova Roma, and Venice. To say he was stretched thin would be a disservice to the hard-working captain, but there just weren't many other people who could do what he was doing for us right now. Constance was doing a fantastic job leading the crew that had stayed behind in Carthage for me, keeping us on track and displaying a surprising amount of nautical knowledge as she kept the ship running smoothly. Months had passed since our battle against the demons outside Carthage and our completion of the world quest. I'd finally begun to feel more like myself again, thanks in big part to the Talihi healers, and they had helped me learn how to fortify and protect my mind from the corruption that had overtaken me and given me the space to slowly reclaim my mind while also making sure I didn't hurt anyone around me. Once I received a clean bill of health from them, my honor guard, as they had taken to calling themselves, began to organize our departure. Constance, Ivy, Isabella, and a group of legionnaires had stayed with me in the Talihi city, more to help me heal by showing me their unwavering support rather than keep me safe from any actual dangers. And once I felt healthy enough to leave, we bid farewell to the Talihi in a rather embarrassing ceremony that had the entire city celebrating the victory over the demons all over again. Excusing myself from that as soon as I could politely do so, we packed our things and made our way to the old Carthage harbor to board our merchant ship. Carthage looked different without the looming demonic threat, and the city was still covered in corruption, but the blood-red demonic runes no longer glowed, and there was something more welcoming about the city now. It helped that the Talihi had decided to make Carthage their second city as they expanded. I suspected they knew a population boom was coming for their people now that so many weren't being killed or corrupted by the demons every night. Carthage was a perfect city to reclaim, both because most of the infrastructure was still there and because it opened up the Mediterranean to the dragon lizard people. And, of course, the city would allow us to begin trading between Venice and the North African coast, which was sure to bring wealth to both our peoples. In the city itself, I had us take a small detour to steal, or claim by right of conquest if I wanted to be more generous to myself, a magical map that showed the entire Mediterranean region and the kingdoms that had once inhabited it. There was a gorgeous work of art detailing the armies and empires as they had been before the fall of Carthage. Every island and every contour of mountain, lake, and river was represented in perfect detail on the map, from the Atlantic to what would be the Middle East on my old world. Of course, the map hadn't been updated in almost 100 years, but I knew I would get use out of it in the future when I needed to plan on a larger scale than just a single city or town. And I wanted to study it further when I had time so I could learn more about how the history of this world had diverged from the history of my old world. And the reason I was contemplating having anything to do with the Pirate King now, after having just barely started to recover from the fight with the demons, was because I needed to know whether he truly was a threat or not. If he was a pushover, a small strike force of Ivy, Isabella, and me might be able to stop the threat he posed in a single night, even with me unable to use some of my more powerful skills. And if he truly was more dangerous than we could handle, it would help if I knew what next steps I needed to take and what kind of precautions might be necessary to keep Venice safe in the future. And since we were passing relatively close to the island on our way back to Venice, and our old merchant ship still had its concealment enchantments active, it seemed like the time to finally take the measure of the Pirate King for good. We had really only heard rumors about him, and seen his sizable navy. I wanted to see the man himself, and know who my opponent really was. And the only problem was, even with the Talihi's help and months of recovery, My corruption was still at 62%, and my mind was still fragile. I hadn't had any episodes of losing control of my mind itself for several weeks, but I still felt like I might slip back into that abyss at any moment if I wasn't careful. Having such a high level of corruption also meant I was receiving a 62% increase to all of my attributes, which was an absolutely insane boost to my power. And that was one of the reasons I was tempted to try for a surgical strike against the king now. And because if there was ever a time to take down the Pirate King, and now might be our best shot.
If you lose control like you did before, you will not return to us,
one of the Talihi healers had told me as we parted for the last time.
If you go so far into the darkness, you will become that which you fear most, a shell of yourself, lost in madness, wandering in the world in search of butchery and bloodshed. Nobody will be safe from you, not even those you love.
Those words repeated themselves in my mind every time I considered throwing myself into danger once again. Part of me was tempted to fly to the pirate island of Sardinia and throw myself against the pirate army and its king, wiping out the entire pirate threat once and for all and bathing in victory over them. But I knew no matter how tempting such a thing was, I wouldn't return. If I let myself descend into wanton butchery like I had against the demons, I would become what the Talihi had warned me of, nothing but a wandering madman hell-bent on slaughter. And knowing the risk of such a thing, I still felt it was important to at least scout out the pirate island to see what kind of leader the Pirate King truly was. I promised myself I would not engage in large-scale battle and would return to our ship if it looked like a battle was inevitable. And to help keep me from losing myself, I made sure to include Ivy and Isabella in my plans. The two of them spent months by my side as I recovered. They would make sure I didn't lose myself once again. When I gave Constance the news of my decision to risk traveling to Sardinia, she gave me a worried look, but ultimately she understood that we did need more information about the pirate threat.
I don't like that you have to be the one to go, but you better be taking Ivy and Isabella, Constance said, or I'll tie myself to your back and make you lug me along for the trip instead.
And she had recently gained the ability to manipulate rope with her mind, a pirate skill that she was very adept with, so I didn't doubt she could do it. I gave her a gentle smile, appreciating her concern and sharing her worries about me taking such a risk. "Already talked to them," I said, "and they've agreed to come with." As I spoke, Ivy uncurled herself from the deck nearby, chirping at me as she spread her wings wide and prepared for our departure. Isabella also appeared, floating upward through the deck, a look of concern on her face for what we were about to do as well.
"Be safe."
Constance stepped forward and gave me a hug.
"Don't push yourself. We need you more than we need the Pirate King dead right now, and you aren't in a good enough state to fight someone truly powerful. You are just scouting out the situation. Please remember that."
"I'll be careful," I said to Constance, returning her hug. "I don't know how long we'll be gone, so plan for us to meet you back in Venice. Don't wait around here, or the pirates may find you." After she broke away from our hug and gave me a very reluctant nod, I leapt upward from the deck of the ship, unfurling my wings as I took to the sky. Ivy joined me first, eagerly flying around me, spinning in circles and crowing at me. She'd been cooped up for months in Talihi City, and while she had been there by my side the entire time, I knew she was eager to fly free and get into a tussle or two. Isabella joined me soon after, and both of us gave Ivy an amused look before we rose higher than the clouds above to try and hide from any spying pirates down below. While Isabella could go invisible at will and Ivy was a shadow dragon that was naturally stealthy, I was a rather large blotch of shadow that even the stealthy capability of my armor couldn't do much to hide in the open air. I did what I could, urging my armor to blend into the clouds as much as possible and activating my stealth skill, hoping it might help. And we flew through the afternoon, taking our time so we would arrive when it became dark. Through breaks in the clouds, we could see a large number of ships coming and going from Sardinia, giving me unwelcome insight into what we faced even before we reached the island. Approaching Sardinia from the southwest, I had counted well over 100 ships in the waters around the pirate island. Most of them were far to the north, presumably traveling to the French cities the pirates had captured along the coast, but some were going to the southeast, some to the west. Plenty of others were just patrolling the waters around the island. I was briefly tempted to follow some of the ships heading to the southeast, curious about where they were going. The map we had recovered in Carthage had shown several empires in that direction, including an ancient Egyptian empire that had apparently never fallen on this world. It would be remarkable if parts of that empire had survived, and I could take time to explore its rich culture and learn about its history. Sadly, that was for another time, or another life. Right now, I needed to focus on what was happening in front of me, and with how many ships were protecting the waters around Sardinia, an attack by sea was practically impossible, at least with the current strength of our navy. Even if we had triple the number of ships, each equipped with concealment enchantments, there had to be several hundred pirate ships in and around the waters of Sardinia, and many were likely warships packed with pirate crews, not just trading vessels. The chances that some mage or high-level pirate could detect us through any concealment we might use, or that the pirates had their own enchantments designed to alert them to hidden attackers, was too high to risk the few ships we had managed to build or recover in Venice and see attack. With a sinking feeling, I realized how outclassed we truly were when it came to trying to claim the Mediterranean Sea for ourselves. If we wanted to keep Venice safe and guarantee free and uninterrupted trade in the region, we would need a lot more resources, a lot more ships, and a lot more soldiers. As night fell, we closed in on the pirate island, using the thickening clouds and darkening sky to hide us even more thoroughly. The island of Sardinia was larger than some countries, and from the air I could see a number of moderately sized cities dotting its coastline. The largest was built on the east coast, where a wide river spilled down from the mountainous inner regions of the island. A heavily fortified harbor ran the length of that city, which was built at the river's mouth. Thick walls and high towers protected a narrow opening into the harbor itself, which meant trying to take the city by sea would be extremely difficult. From here, I could see that the towers were filled with ballistae and plenty of soldiers, likely archers or mages if I had to guess. For all the flaws of the pirates that I had seen so far, recklessness, willingness to sacrifice their comrades, poor hygiene, it was clear that Sardinia itself was run by someone that knew what they were doing. There were at least 4 more major cities on the island, each one glowing brightly as night fell. The sight of so many cities and the quality of the defenses made it even more obvious we weren't just fighting some ramshackle pirate king, but a functioning, organized country. That country may use pirates as fodder for its navy, but I suspected we had yet to see their true strength in Venice. If it came to war, taking such a fortified harbor and then the other 4 major cities, not to mention all the smaller towns and villages that dotted the island, would require thousands of soldiers, and even then we would take heavy losses and possibly face an insurgency that could be even messier to deal with. As night fell, Ivy, Isabella, and I circled the city, and then we used the cover of darkness to sneak inside. And no alarms sounded, and no soldiers came after us, bringing the first good news of the day our way. And once we were safely on the ground, I disguised myself as a pirate, my armor effortlessly shifting to copy one nearby as he stumbled drunkenly down the street. And while I was doing that, Isabella found us a derelict house on the outskirts of the city that we could use as a base of operations. And once we claimed the house as our own, we didn't waste any time in scouting the city. Isabella faded into invisibility and went in one direction, while Ivy shadowed me from the rooftops as I went in another. At first, it seemed almost like any other city in the world, and the night was relatively safe, except for a few boisterous drunks and a mugger or two. And most people were asleep, and there was even a night patrol of guards to keep the peace. I began to pick up on something more sinister going on when I noticed the laborers who were out at night. Normally the backbone of most cities, they were all downcast and appeared exhausted. Despite their obviously poor condition, not a single one ever stopped to take a break or complained about their working conditions. and many had open sores on their face and bodies, and they all looked malnourished to the point of starvation. The majority of the laborers were men lugging goods from the docks to the rest of the city, even in the dark of night, and all of them looked pushed to the point of near collapse as they carried goods that had to weigh 2 to 3 times their own body weight. And despite that, not a single one of them complained, rebelled, or met the eyes of anyone they passed. It was odd, and I found myself following them so I could understand more of what was happening. As the night progressed, even the bars and taverns closed, leaving only dark, empty streets full of the silent, starved workers endlessly trudging from place to place with their burdens on their backs. It made for an eerie, unnatural sight, one that caused goosebumps to rise on the back of my neck as I briefly took to a nearby rooftop and saw how many of the workers filled the silent streets. I entered one of the last open taverns to try to gather more information about the city before calling it a night, and the establishment I chose was surprisingly clean on the inside, although the outside left a lot to be desired. A wooden bar dominated one side of the common room, while stairs leading upward curved out of sight next to the right of the bar. Fine wooden tables with benches filled the rest of the room, while several women worked diligently to serve food and keep the bar spotless. The clientele was the exact opposite of the clean and tidy interior. Drunk, smelly, and obnoxious seemed to be the default state of most of the pirates inside, and as I sat at the bar to nurse a drink, things only became worse as the already drunk patrons became even rowdier. The primary topic of conversation seemed to be the conquest of France and how much plunder everyone would take home once they got sent to the front lines. That, and bragging about their various exploits in battle and in bed, which were both clearly exaggerated by every pirate in the tavern. I eventually tuned out the useless chatter, finding nothing of value in the drunk pirates' boasting. Instead, I watched and listened to how the women cleaning and serving were treated. The women were all young, but they shared blank, almost empty looks on their faces, and nobody thanked them or tipped them when they brought out people's drinks or cleaned up one of the many messes made by the inebriated pirates. As the night wore on, the pirates became bolder, ordering the women around like animals, forcing them to clean up deliberately made spills, serve them drinks faster, and engage in other, even more demeaning acts. The women never objected or tried to resist in any way. We knew the Pirate King had the ability to turn people to his side through some kind of mental compulsion, but as the night went on, it became clear that someone or something on the island could do even worse than that.
"Cheers to our king and god,"
one of the pirates said as he poured a drink on the floor, signaling one of the serving women to clean it up with a rude gesture.
"Whatever they do to these slaves to make them so obedient is God's blessing to us all, I say."
The other pirates at his table cheered, gulping down more alcohol and staring lecherously as the serving woman kneeled before them and began to clean the spilled drink without complaint.
"And I hear more are on the way from another captured city in France," a young man from another table said, his eager, lustful face staring at the serving woman as she cleaned on her hands and knees. My blood boiled as the words of the pirates confirmed for me why the workers were so docile and mindless. The king had used whatever power he had to turn people to his side, to make mindless slaves of his own workforce, uncaring how poorly they were all treated. And my armor began to shift, shadows writhing around my arms as large, shadowy claws began to grow from my fingertips. And the mug in my hand shattered, piss-poor ale spilling over my fingers and onto the bar, although, with how raucous the tavern was, nobody seemed to notice. And as I stared at the woman on her knees, cleaning in front of the pirates, my anger almost overwhelmed my mind. I saw images of myself tearing through the entire room as I killed every pirate in sight. They were almost too powerful for me to control. And I felt my armor respond to my rage with a welcoming mental roar, eager to engage in the slaughter my mind was picturing. And with a frantic surge of willpower, I forced my anger down, pushing my armor to withdraw as I desperately tamped down my murderous rage. If I started killing pirates now, I had no idea if I would ever stop. I recalled to my mind the mental image of me wandering the world, lost in madness as I killed indiscriminately like a rabid beast.
And that was enough to cool my temper slightly, allowing me to close my eyes and take a deep breath. Some of the tension in my body released, and I felt my armor withdraw back into me in response. I pushed myself away from the bar, trying not to stare at what was happening around me, and staggered to the door and out onto the street. I lurched away from the tavern, looking like just another drunk pirate, and then forced myself further and further away from the tavern and the workers inside. I could do nothing to help them. I lost myself in the city for a time after that. Guilt, anger, and fear of how close I had just come to letting myself go, all boiled inside of me. I tried to focus on my breathing and some of the exercises that Talihi had taught me to calm myself down, but every time I passed another silent worker, his emaciated body carrying 100 pounds or more of goods through the city, I lost my concentration. And when I finally got myself under some measure of control once again, I had wandered far off the beaten path of the city and found myself in an unknown area with no clear idea of how I had gotten there.
"Hey!"
I heard someone yell at me as I stumbled to a stop in the middle of the dark street I was on.
"This ain't your part of the city. You can't be sleeping here, you fucking pirate scum. You looking for trouble?"
I looked over to see a young man, a kid, really, barely past puberty, shaking slightly as he tried to intimidate me. He held a small, rusty knife in one hand and seemed to be protecting a half-demolished house behind him. I could hear several people shuffling around inside and spotted a number of eyes watching from behind broken shutters. I raised my hands, not wanting any kind of confrontation with such a young, brave kid just trying to protect his family or friends. With my hands held high, I backed away down the street. He let me go, keeping the knife pointed in my direction the entire time until I turned a corner and left his sight. Above me, Ivy poked her head up from a nearby roof, looking to me for directions on whether she should attack the kid. I quickly shook my head, gesturing for her to duck back down and continue to hide. Realizing I was still lost and not wanting to risk taking to the air, I ducked into a nearby alley and climbed the side of one of the buildings. The roofs in this part of the city were barely held together with spit and polish, so I simply dashed from one to the other, never setting too much of my weight down on any one roof. Ivy helped guide me back to the part of the city we had chosen to hide out in, the two of us racing across the rooftops together. Her stealth was so impressive that even I lost sight of her from time to time. We eventually found ourselves back at the house we had claimed, where Isabella was already waiting for the two of us. She had been scouting the island at large and told me more of what she had learned about the other cities, confirming what I had suspected about their size, location, and defenses. Once Ivy and I got settled in, I told her what I'd learned. "We knew they had some way to control people's minds," I said, "but I didn't realize they were using it on regular people and turning them into what I saw." Isabella's eyes got progressively darker as I told her about what I'd found. The darkness itself seemed to rise with her anger as well. What little moonlight had trickled down into the city disappeared as her anger overtook her. When she'd heard everything I had learned, she nodded once and then began to fade into the rising shadows.
"Don't worry,"
she said to me as she began to disappear, her whispery voice coming to me through the shadows.
"I just wanted to pay that tavern a brief visit. I'll be very subtle."
I didn't particularly believe her, but I also didn't want to stop her. And those pirates deserved what Isabella was about to do to them, and even if I had wanted to interfere on their behalf, I didn't think I could have stopped Isabella when she was in her true Shadow Queen self. When Isabella returned about an hour later, she had a grim smile on her face, and the shadows around her appeared slightly lighter. I was sitting in the middle of the floor, trying to meditate as best as I could while the image of the kneeling woman from the inn kept intruding and disrupting my attempts to settle my mind. The house we were in also smelled like mold and the remnants of several different vermin, which didn't help my concentration. "We need to do something about this island," I said by way of greeting. "There is something seriously wrong here."
"I agree,"
Isabella said, floating over to me.
"But what can we do at this point? Your mind is fragile, and our forces are nowhere near strong enough to take a city like this, let alone the whole island."
"Yeah, I've had to swallow that bitter pill already, but there are things I could be doing, things I've been afraid to dabble in, but After seeing what I've seen here, I think I need to get over my fear. She gave me a concerned look before eventually nodding.
Let me know if I can help at all. Otherwise, I'll focus on the spying for now. You need to be careful about getting so angry.
I'll be as careful as I can afford to be, I said, closing my eyes and trying to enter a meditative state once again. This time, instead of following some of the exercises the Talihi had taught me, I pulled up the lingering announcements about my Scion Corrupted class that I'd been putting off. After unlocking it during my fight against the demons, I'd been avoiding taking any of the higher-level skills that were open to me because, if I was being honest with myself, the class scared me. I'd earned the class spontaneously against my conscious will because my mind had been shattered so thoroughly during the fight with the demons. And that was bad enough, but then any class that was learned while I was under the demon's influence had a chance of being corrupted, which replaced the class's normal skills with corruption-based skills. The skills became more powerful, but raised a person's corruption every time they used one. From what little I had seen, the corrupted classes seemed designed to make people dependent on raising their corruption as high as possible, making them dependent on the demonic skills. And if someone ever reached 100% corruption, they would turn into a demon, losing control of their mind and possibly restarting the demon invasion all over again. Something I did not want to happen, especially with me as the focal point. The only way to lower my corruption was to use a different skill provided by the class, which never got rid of as much corruption as using an active skill or through long periods of quiet meditation. And the other alternative that I'd seen in some of the skills was to actively infect someone else with my own corruption, spreading it to others who might not resist the corruption as well as me, which was something I'd been very hesitant to do. And so it was fair to say I had plenty of good reasons for not exploring the class. Until now. I had level 10, 20, 30, and 40 skills to select for the Scion Corrupted class. Given what I had seen and the power of the small island nation, I needed to move past my fear of the class and learn to access the power it offered me, or there was no way I would gain back control of my mind quickly enough to survive the coming ordeals, both here on Sardinia and elsewhere. Please choose a level 10 class skill. Mental projection. Create a duplicate of yourself that has all of your abilities but must be controlled by you at all times. It takes more damage from any form of attack and will dissipate when too much damage has been absorbed. Higher corruption allows your duplicate to act on its own initiative at times, for better or worse. Causes a moderate amount of corruption while active. Dominate others. You gain the ability to take control of nearby sapient or sentient beings with a lower willpower attribute than your psychic control attribute. And the number of beings you can control scales based on your corruption and psychic control attribute. Causes a low amount of corruption while active. Corrupting touch. You gain the ability to lower your corruption a moderate amount by inflicting your corruption on another person you are currently touching. This skill allows you to spread your corruption onto a single victim at a time, lowering your corruption by an equal amount. This skill scales with your psychic control attribute. Psychic attack. You make an attack on another's mind, causing a small amount of mental damage or implanting an illusory memory into their mind. The power of this attack scales based on your psychic control attribute and your level of corruption. Causes a low amount of corruption with each use. Dream thief. You may infiltrate the mind of a sleeping person, gaining control of their dreams and forcing them to reveal any information you wish or relive any memory they have. You may also shape their current dream as you see fit. Causes a low amount of corruption while inside another's dream. Confess. You force everyone and everything around you to speak the truth, whether they wish to or not. May only be resisted if a being's willpower is higher than your psychic control attribute. If they do resist, you are made aware of their immunity. Causes moderate corruption while active. Shatter. You break the mind of another person or creature, shattering their consciousness into a million pieces. Your victim will be more likely to succumb if they are physically injured or exhausted, or if their mind is strained already. High willpower or endurance may also resist your attack. Lowers your corruption by a small amount on successful use, leaving the corruption in the mind of your victim. Psychic barrier. The higher your corruption becomes, the more you are able to resist losing your mind. But the physical manifestation of your corruption spreads faster and causes more drastic mutations. Synaptic beam. You unleash a beam of pure mental torture, causing significant psychic damage to everything in its path. Causes a low amount of corruption with each use. I sighed, unhappy with the general theme of the class, even though I couldn't deny how powerful some of the skills were. And these were just the level 10 and leftover level 1 skills. I carefully considered all my options and decided to start with a defensive skill. It helped reassure me I wasn't making the wrong choice by delving into such a dangerous class, and it would give me an immediate benefit. I selected Psychic Barrier. The Talihi had asked me to briefly describe the skill options I had before, although I hadn't been fully in my right mind at the time. And they'd warned me against taking something like Psychic Barrier before I was further along in my recovery because I could become dependent on skills instead of learning to heal my mind on my own. And now I just had to hope the months I'd spent with the Talihi healers had laid a strong enough foundation, because I needed something now to help me control my anger. Otherwise, I could lose myself completely and never come back. As I selected the skill, I felt my head clear for a moment, and a weight I hadn't been fully aware of lifted from my mind. I took a deep breath, and even among the moldy air of the rundown house we were squatting in, the world smelled slightly fresher. I felt like a man that had been drowning and had finally caught a breath of air. It wasn't enough to keep me alive forever, but it was enough to give me a moment of clarity and a surge of strength to keep swimming. At the same time, I felt my body change as well. The downside to the skill came into play as the physical corruption covering 62% of my body spread even further. I didn't remove the disguise my armor was creating for me, afraid of what I'd see, but I felt the corruption seeping further through my veins, corrupting my body from my toes up to my neck. It even touched upon my head and face for the first time ever. The sensation burned painfully, but even worse was the alienness of the corruption as it spread through my body. It just felt wrong, like having something under my skin that wasn't a part of my body. It left me feeling disgusted with myself, even as my mind felt clearer for the first time in months. To distract myself, I quickly pulled up my options for the level 20 Scion Corrupted skill. At level 20, 5 new skills were available for me to choose from, in addition to all the older skills, but after reviewing them all, I selected Corrupting Touch, the level 1 skill. It allowed me to dump some of my corruption onto another person, notably not on monsters, it seemed, which was something I had wanted to avoid but knew I might need someday. I briefly considered the Shatter skill as a means of getting rid of the corruption, but unlike Corrupting Touch, Shatter could be resisted and also required a rather severe mental attack against another being, something that seemed far crueler than the already villainesque Corrupting Touch. The trade-off seemed to be that Shatter could be used against anything with a mind, person or monster. But in a city full of pirates, using Corrupting Touch wouldn't be as much of a problem as it might seem. At least for now. The level 30 and 40 skills were dangerous, almost too dangerous for me to take even after I'd resolved to stop limiting myself so much. Skills like Permanent Control, which let me gain absolute control over another person forever for only a one-time cost of moderate corruption, and Mind Plague, which let me unleash a mental plague that drove everyone it infected permanently insane and spread to anyone nearby whether I wanted it to or not. Why in the world would someone want a skill that caused a pandemic of madness that even they couldn't control? And there was no doubt in my mind this class was for the criminally insane. I chose one of the least villainous skills I could find for level 30, a skill called Create Mindscape, which created a psychic representation of my mental state and allowed me to build up my mind like a fortress to protect myself or attack others. The corrupted aspect of the skill meant the higher my corruption, the better my defenses, and according to the skill, when I attacked someone psychically, I could push some of the corruption into their mind. I chose the skill because it was both a defensive mental skill and a potential corruption dump, two benefits I sorely needed. Finally, for level 40, I resigned myself to taking a truly offensive-oriented skill. The skill was called Mind Thief, which allowed me to permanently drain mental or magical attributes from another, steal their memories, or even temporarily take a skill from another person or monster. Mind Thief. You make a psychic attack on the mind of another and may choose to steal their intelligence, magical or mental attributes, memories, or even a skill. You gain power from what you steal, experiencing a surge in your attributes, reliving the memories you stole, or temporarily gaining use of a skill. After the surge in power, you have a chance to permanently gain attributes based on the nature of what you stole, and your victim has a chance to permanently lose the attributes, intelligence, memories, or skill that you stole. The number of targets and the extent to which you can drain your victim scales based on your psychic control attribute, causes a high amount of corruption on use. The most useful aspect of the skill wasn't necessarily that I could drain such thing from another's mind, but that the skill then gave me a temporary boost based on whatever I had taken, which could include allowing me to use a drained skill for a short period of time, undergo a surge in my own intelligence or magical powers, or even experience the memories I'd taken as if they were my own. After the temporary surge passed, I also had a chance to gain permanent attribute bonuses based on what I had stolen, and the victim might never recover their lost skill, memory, or attribute. Using the skill caused a high amount of corruption and was definitely more on the villainous side of the scale, but I couldn't deny the skill's potential power. It was a brutal skill, something that left behind victims that were potentially missing memories, intelligence, or even hard-won skills. And for all that, compared to some of the other skills I could have chosen, it was downright saintly. I hadn't even wanted to finish reading some of the other level 40 skills, like brain worms, which allowed me to create worms that infiltrated people's minds, consuming them from the inside out and replacing them with corrupted copies of me. Some things even I wouldn't inflict on the world in order to try to save it. Altogether, I had gained several new, potentially useful skills, and all it had cost me was facing some of my own fears about the corrupted nature of my mind and body. I was feeling slightly better mentally, if significantly worse physically, and if I took the time to work on building up my mindscape, I might even find a more long-term solution to my fragile mind. I had made the best choices I could for what I needed right now, and I just had to hope it was enough to let me stay sane in the city long enough to gather all the information we needed.